put things in my chat and in my chat database.
Yep.
And what it's telling you is, hey, I read the last 10 messages. I'm going to emit them.
Yeah.
So if you look at our console.log, that's right over here. I'm going to emit this, the chat content. And if I go to my Internet Explorer, it actually did emit the chat content. And
that looks like a fascinating chat.
Yeah, hello world.
Hello world.
Yeah. You'll notice this error right here was because we restarted the server, so it lost the connection for a brief moment.
Right.
But you'll notice it got it back. And as a result, it actually got back through WebSockets the chat that was already in the database.
Right.
Now, I won't demo this part because we're running short on time. And we'll get back to you guys in the next module. I'll let Stacy conclude this one.
Yeah, so we've gone through basically setting up Mongo, using Mongo to save messages, to bring some back. Once again, the code samples are all up on the GitHub, so you can walk through and kind of just say, okay, get used to the syntax that you use when you're using that module that we required to use Mongo. And you can get used to the idea of like selecting items for your collection, whatnot. I highly recommend that if you haven't played with Mongo, install it, play with it a little bit in the command prompt, like insert things, find things, return one, that kind of thing. It'll get you a lot more comfortable with what's happening in the code for sure. And then you can, start to kind of work your way through there. So based on what we did just now, we kind of have that basic backend working. We're emitting messages. What we're going to do is we're going to come back after the meal break. Pizza. Yeah, and what we're going to do is we're going to start pizza. Yeah, over here. Can you keep up with me? Can't keep up with me, can you? It's because I eat so fast. And we're going to talk about, okay, so we've got some of the back end stuff done. Now we need to worry about the front end, and we're going to do a little bit of the front end. We're going to walk through quickly just like getting some stuff in there in terms of how does Jade work? What does the syntax look like? Pizza keeps moving. I just keep wanting to grab it. Bootstrap, that kind of thing. Spending a little time on the UI. Pizza. Stay there, pizza. There we go. And, and then we'll continue on that road. We'll wire them all together, and then we'll deploy this stuff and get off and running to the races. So I don't know about you, but I'm ready to have a pizza.
Awesome.
We'll see you guys in about an hour, according to Barry.
Give us a minute, folks. But welcome back to the MVA Building Apps with Node.
Yes.
Stacy is now connected, and this module, all right, we're going to do creating the user interface. That's the title of the module. That's what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on the Bootstrap, the web components, the HTML that we need to actually make the chat room what it is.
I'm still laughing. I was, see, what you guys thought is I wasn't plugged in, but I was going to mime this entire module. So the joke is on you, all right? We're going to work on creating the user interface, the UI.
For our chat room,
everyone loves acronyms. So we're going to walk through a couple things, and just to give you a sense of what this module is going to have. Remember, in the previous modules, we've kind of gone through an intro to using Node, walking through the bit of Express framework with Node. We tossed in a little Mongo there, threw in a dash of Socket.io, sprinkled it all around. We got something in the oven. It's of no use if we have no way to consume whatever is in the oven. I have food all over the brain. I had pizza on my brain before. I'm thinking chocolate cake. I don't know if that will appear. Yeah, pizza right there. Sometime in the future, there will be chocolate cake. So we need to cover, I'd be all over that. Who does like sundaes, really? Oh, man. Can you imagine me as a little kid, just all over my face, just like ice cream? Module overview. Let's get back to what we're supposed to be doing. I could talk about food all day, but I won't bore you. So we're going to be talking about the user interface and how do we kind of create something and what's probably, I wouldn't say best practices, but a pretty decent approach in terms of like what you should do. I try to not use best practices. I try not to use it liberally because, best practices to me is what works for you. So, we'll talk about introduction to Jade. We'll talk about Jade templates, how they work, things that we like about them, things that maybe we don't like. I mean, we don't have to like everything. It doesn't have to be a love affair with every single thing that we have. But there's really good things and bad things, really good things, and maybe some, stuff that you have to watch for. And you'll find that in any kind of templating system, to be honest. Implementing Bootstrap. We're, going to toss in some Bootstrap. They just recorded kind of like an introduction to Bootstrap if you're not familiar with it. It's worth totally going through because Bootstrap is its own entire framework, its own entire entity. We're going to gloss over it. And then we're just going to talk about creating the chat UI and bringing all those things kind of together. So this is really a user interface kind of focused module. And then after this, we're going to talk about, okay, we have the back end, we know what's going on there, we have the front end, how do we glue them together? So we're going to talk a little bit about Jade, and Jade is a templating engine that you can use. It's really pretty much, I think it's like the default for using Express. So if you don't specify what you want to use, you get Jade, right?
Yeah, pretty much. If you're not specifying a custom one, your Jade comes in as part of the default sample code in Node tools for Visual Studio, as well as some of the other Express generators out there as well.
Yeah.
So it's definitely the one that is probably used the most often with Node, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, unless you're really familiar with all the various templating frameworks or systems, whatever you want to use. If you're really familiar, then you'll probably go and change that configuration or use what you want to use. But otherwise, most people kind of, when they're up and running and just trying to learn Node and learn Express, it's just Jade is what goes hand in hand. And then there's a lot of tutorials on it. So it kind of makes it easier in that sense. So, templating with Jade, what does Jade actually do? Like if I was to say, okay, what does Jade do? What does it look like?
So here's the nice thing about Jade, is it takes HTML and then drops all of the tags, all of the brackets. It doesn't drop all the tags, sorry, that was not correct. It just drops the brackets.
Right.
So it makes the HTML a lot simpler. You don't have to have the closing tags. Those tags are actually dropped. And it uses indentation to make your HTML a lot more readable.
Right.
And a lot more simpler to understand and to visualize. So it's a great templating language. It's super straightforward to use. And for someone who's maybe not too familiar with HTML, although I believe that most of you are, but if you aren't, or if you just simply don't want to spend too much time writing HTML, especially when it gets super verbose with all of the angle brackets and everything, Jade lets you. It just makes your life easier. It's awesome. It's
quick.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like, it's almost like, I like to think of these things a little bit like for the lazy programmer. I don't know if it's like, if you guys are like me, but I'm kind of like, maybe I'm going to type with one hand.
All programmers
Well,
we have a little bit of laziness in there.
Are we lazy or do we look for efficiencies?
I think we look for efficiency.
The less
typing that you do, I don't know.
The better.
Yeah, my hands tend to hurt if I type too much.
Especially if you're typing like this.
It's like,
you are the fastest typer, by the way. I actually asked him earlier, like, are you really typing? Because it was just so fast. I thought he was just making it up, like waiting for a response from me. And I was like, well, you got the response because like wrote a novel in no time. So I brought up the Jade website here, and it's just like the Node template engine. This is a really good, first of all, you got to check out the site. It's got lots of documentation. You can walk through. It'll give you examples. So if you're looking to how to do something like, maybe I'm looking for, how to create a template that's going to be an LI that repeats it. Maybe I need to include script in it, or maybe I need to, escape some characters or things like that, or any of that kind of stuff that comes with templating. The API, the language reference and all that kind of thing, you can kind of start to walk through it and see, all the stuff on the website, jade-lang.com. And once again, the documentation, really, really good. It can walk you through all the basics. If we take a look just at this basic example, and once again, we're going to go through what we've used, but just giving you a sense of, how it looks. If you look at the example, you'll see that this is going to convert to HTML. But once again, we don't have the tags. We don't have an open and closing tag. You'll start to see how like IDs, for example, highlighted here, are created. How, sorry.
Yeah, quick question. You just mentioned these ID tags.
Yep.
So what actually is the element that gets generated?
Div, isn't it?
It's a div.
Div, yeah. I always feel like, if I get this wrong, what's going to happen? No pizza, no cake.
Sorry to put you on the spot there, but I needed to know because there seems to be
there's no divs.
There's no keyword there that you typically see in an HTML, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
you're losing some of those kind of elements like divs and whatnot start to get automatically, created for you. And then, you've got your body tag, if you need something to be in H1. So again, you can see that if you started using this and you got used to the syntax, the indentation kind of gives you the sense of like, the structure that you would normally have in HTML in terms of opening and closing tags. You can see how it could probably be very, very quick once you got used to this in terms of writing what you need to write. And especially if you're building a web application where so much of the stuff is templated, you're not writing custom kind of HTML structures page after page after page. You're probably going to reuse a bunch of templates. Some templates might be variations of other templates. Think of an e-commerce site, for example, where you have a product listing and then a product page. There might be very few variations on that product page. Maybe that product might have a sale item. Maybe it won't. So you can do things like figuring out if that data item that's been given to it, if there's something there, show this or do this, or you can start to have basic logic in this kind of stuff. And once again, it just kind of gives you the HTML structure. And what you do is you pass it. Most templating engines work some way where they have a structure, whether they're getting it from a string, whether you're looking at something like Jade, like this kind of structure, and then you pass it a data object, and then it uses that data object to set all the identified variables that might be in the page. So you start to see a lot of, that kind of systematically, doesn't matter what templating engine you go through, they kind of all work that way. And so looking through this, you'll see just a variety of a couple of the things. And this is a basic example. If you go through any of the language reference here, you can go through and if you're like, oh, okay, how do I add a class? Or, if I need to figure out if there's, something that exists or not, or let's say you have some, things that you need to escape, for example, or you need to include certain files on certain pages. Like, let's say you have certain JavaScript you want to include on a certain page versus not. Those kind of things, you can just go through the language reference and start to see. And once you get the hang of it, it's very, very easy. One of the nice things about Jade is that, it kind of has that ability to extend templates, right? So you could have a standard template that let's say, like my prime example is a product page. You have a standard template you use for it. You could extend something. Let's say maybe there's a different type of product, or it's, you're going to add certain things and it's enough. It makes no sense to put an if statement in it. You could have a whole other template that kind of extends it, right? So that's like one of the really nice features I think about Jade for sure, is that like depending on what you're building and how complex it is, you have that ability to have a reusable code and reusable templates where you can then just extend and add what you need.
Yeah, it lets you definitely separate all of the HTML that you have, so you can keep it smaller, modularized.
I know, it's such a hard word.
It is. It's like one of those words. It's like
you should just be like blah blah. Blah. You know what I'm saying? Blah.
Something. Yeah. So it keeps you it keeps your code base a lot cleaner. You can separate things out. You don't have this gigantic HTML file, or you don't have a whole bunch of them. One thing that I really like about this is that let's say that you had a base layout for your HTML page, you can reuse that layout across different pages. Mm-hmm. All you do is basically extend that one, and that's what's really cool about it. You can just extend existing HTML. blocks that you have.
Yeah, and I think the modular word is like a big theme that you're kind of hearing throughout today, and I think that you hear in general in terms of modern web development is that everything is modular, it's componentized, it's small chunks. And so, for example, Node, we're requiring modules. Modules tend to be something that does one thing really, really well, or wraps, a library of, that's focused on a task really, really well. Same thing with these kind of things. You're seeing the structure of Express. It's modularizing things. It's putting things in views, routes. You're starting to see that all these things are being put into little digestible chunks, if you will. And so same thing with your Jade templating. And it's really important to note that because not only does it help you kind of work with what you're doing or organize your work, it helps you work with teams as well, because they start to be able to look at this and I can say, okay, you know what? Hey, can you go and handle the admin panel? It's going to be in here, here, and here. And I'm going to be doing the front end with that little widget that does a carousel, because everyone needs a carousel on a website. Yep. Who doesn't want a carousel? There's not a website that doesn't need a carousel. Cue sarcasm here. And yeah, exactly. Or slow clap. My rant for the day. But it allows us to work in those ways where we're not worrying about each other. Whereas if you didn't do it that way and we're all like, we're working on the product page and there's going to be a carousel and there's going to be a recommendation and there's going to be those things. I might be trying to work on this part. You might be trying to work on that part. And the next thing you know, we're just like, okay, I overwrote that. You committed that. I did, and then I'm, just slowly not talking to you for the rest of the day. And then I'm slowly never talking to you again. And then I remove you from my GitHub repository and then it's over, right? So it starts to allow you to work this way, very, very modular. And, once again, you'll hear that again and again in modern web development. And once you start working that way, it ends up being a little bit more natural for you. So end of carousel rant on websites. Some basic examples. And I think what we're going to do, just going back into here, is... So we talked about some of the benefits of working with templating and working with Jade. Helps prevent code repeat. I mean, come on, who wants to write the same code over and over and over again, right? So that whole, what is it? Reduce, reuse, recycle. Like it's the whole green mentality for programming. Yeah.
Dry. Don't repeat yourself.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. I'm environmentally friendly here, apparently. Whatevs.
I am too.
Whatevs. But it also makes sure that the HTML that you're generating is clean. And so sometimes, especially if you're writing complex stuff, you'll find like, oh, okay, that nested tag or whatever, maybe you're missing something, and maybe some browsers are okay with that, maybe some other browsers not okay with that, so this allows you to kind of make sure that you're also, adhering to some of those things. And, you can just insert any of the data or the values into these templates. And so, again, once you start using templates, and if you're building the type of site where that's really what you need, it makes a lot of sense. So, templating with Jade kind of affords you the ability to build those things in chunks and use them. And it works really, really nicely with Node. So just to go over an example of, and we saw something, on the Jade site, but to give you the actual output, if you look at just some simple tags here, so you specify a div, you get the output of a div, and then you'll see that if something's tabbed in, so like an address element, for example, it's going to go and do that same kind of, hierarchy that you would try to achieve in HTML. Same thing with the I and the strong. You see that, I and strong and address, they're all, in terms of hierarchy, at the same level, so they kind of just follow one after another. And then the div closes, and it just assumes that stuff. So I like how I say stuff, like super vague. I'm just going to say, stuff. But, assumes that HTML structure, and it writes it for you. So some of the stuff that you're writing can be very, very quickly done if you're using templates. I think the only thing for Jade that kind of not glowy, super happy about is, and I get this in all languages. Sometimes am I spacing? Am I tabbing? Am I tabbing correctly? 2 tabs over, 3, and it gets a little, I don't know how you feel about it, but sometimes it's not sure about that kind of stuff because it really does depend on that. But outside of that, I mean, that's a small kind of,
It's the price you pay for readability, I guess. If the tool forces you to have these tabbing very specific, it makes the code a lot more readable. But yes, you're right. It doesn't make it becomes a little bit inflexible as well sometimes because you don't want to always have these long, non-ending tabs. Right?
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I like to complain about something. Nothing's really that perfect unless it's pizza or cake. I got to complain about it. So if we're looking at templating with Jade, we gave another example here. And, sometimes you're like, okay, that example you gave, awesome, super simple though. I'm going to need to add classes. I'm going to need to add IDs. I'm going to need to add all these things. So you can start to see, on the example on the left, which is like your Jade syntax versus the output on the right. You've got your H1 and we're going to give it an ID, right? And then it's a welcome to Jade. And so the text that would be in between that node that you normally would create just comes after it. And then any kind of attributes go within those brackets. And so, ID equals title. And then you've got the text, once again, that's hard-coded text. Maybe we want to switch that out. Maybe that's something that's going to be coming from a database at some point. But you can see the output there. And then on the next example, you have a button and you want to add a class, right? And so BTN is actually it's a base class, so to speak, in Bootstrap. And so we are adding this class button here. We're adding like this action to it, what it may be. And you can start to see how it translates out in terms of how those, attributes get added, what they look like, how it starts to output the HTML for you. And so, those are pretty much really the common things you end up doing, adding IDs when you need to add them, adding classes, and then you start getting into like changing up the data and things like that. Mm-hmm. So templating with Jade, we talked a little bit about the nice feature of creating like a base layout and extending it. You want to talk about extending?
Yeah, absolutely. So with Jade, there's a couple of extra keywords that are added that are not present in regular HTML. And among them, it's the extends keyword. And this basically lets a template extend a layout or another parent template. What it lets you do is it overrides certain blocks in the parent template or the layout that you're extending. Mm-hmm. And those blocks are actually defined by the block, no S, keyword.
Block.
Block. And the block keyword allows you to establish a block, and you can even put content in the block, so like it will be the default content.
Yep.
And when that content is overridden, it's just completely removed and replaced with the new content as well.
So if you had like a Jade, like if you had a template that was, let's say, you had a product listing and you had a picture, you had a title, you had a description, you had like a buy now button. And so let's say your default was that it wasn't available yet. And so it was like, this item's coming soon, and there might not be a button, for example, or it's disabled, however you might be. When you extend it, is that what you're talking about in terms of that content blocks? Is that you could replace that entire block?
Exactly. You could replace the entire block, and you can, you could use it to really create these very flexible base templates, mm-hmm. and that do hold some structure and some of the stuff that you definitely require.
Yeah.
So think about including your JavaScript files or your CSS files. You can have a parent layout that all other templates will extend from, but they all have at least a uniform handling of the dependency, so you don't have to worry about that manually for every single template.
Right.
That's one of the examples. That's how we actually use the extender.
It sounds very object-oriented in that way, where you're whether you're using a preprocessor to same kind of system where you have your base stuff and you're using your base stuff, and then you're basically saying, okay, well here's my base template. This is giving me all the things I'm going to need again and again and again, and these things maybe I'm going to extend them, right? And so if you decide you're going to use a JavaScript JavaScript library all of a sudden that everyone needed, instead of like going to all these other templates and fixing them, you could just go to base, right, and throw it in, and then you'd be good.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So just using Jade templates, we're going to look at the project that we have currently, and then talk a little bit about how they're used, and just walking through, where the data is coming from, that kind of thing. One of the things that comes to mind here at this point is that what we're doing in terms of our user interface, I think it's okay to say this, I think it's fairly simple.
Yeah,
right?
It's fairly straightforward.
Straightforward might be the better way. Yeah, it's fairly straightforward. But if you were to use building something a little bit more complex, that you were going to use extensive use of base templates and multiple templates, that is something that you don't want to take lightly. You don't want to just throw in and start writing out your presentation stuff. You probably need to think about it in the same way that you would your app or you would your backend. You need to architect what that's going to be like.
Yeah, maybe your data. If you have a hierarchy with your pages, then that could be a good way to actually structure your templates and your layouts. So if you had, let's say, products this is a general category, but so you would start with the base layout, then there's the product layout, and then there's the individual product, and then there's maybe like the product reviews. There could be other layouts as well that are extending the products. Like the general product
sold out product versus not available or coming soon versus on sale. They might all have little differences.
If you've got a URL hierarchy, that could be a good way to structure your templates.
Cool. So we're going to look just a little bit at how we use Jade templates, and in our project, kind of just dissect them a little bit, look at the output that they give, and just show how easy it is to kind of go in, take a look, read them, and have an understanding of what's going in. So I'm just going to open up Visual Studio here, and once again, we're in the very last from the GitHub, which is github.com/SAYAR/ capital N node MVA, right? That's where the GitHub is. We have them on the other module slides as well. We're working through the last example, 09 node chat room. That's all we're going to be working in through the entire afternoon. And so you can start to see the structure. Once again, I think it's worth just going through the structure and explaining, we have our app. This is an Express application with Node, so we have views, routes, and public. We're going to probably be working for today mostly showing you in the public folder and in views. So in views, I'm going to take a look at the templates that are being used here. You'll notice, first things first, is that it's index.jade. So it recognizes it as a Jade file. And if we go in, if we go into index, first thing you'll notice, if I was looking at this project and I had no idea, and I just pulled it down, I would see extends layout. Extends is one of those keywords that, depending on what language you come from, you're probably familiar with the concept. You're extending something. There's something that might have a base class. So immediately I would look at this and I would say, this extends something. So this is great, but I need to figure out what it's extending. And that's why it's right at the top, it's extending it. So I can go to layout and I can look at layout and get a sense of what I'm extending here. And so looking through this Jade template, you see this HTML, you've got the head, we've got a title, that we're going to apply. We have, this is where you might have all your references again to any of your style sheets. For example, we're including Bootstrap here. It's been minified. We're including the Bootstrap theme. You can start to see all of those things that, just right up top. And then you see, this basic page, for example, you'll see this block of content. So that's the block element you were talking about before, right? So this, at some point, we could do something here if we needed to. And we have all the scripts that we're going to need. So we're, I look at this and I know we're including jQuery from a CDN. We're pointing to Bootstrap, JavaScript. So we've got some kind of modules from Bootstrap that we're going to use behavior-wise. And then we've also got the socket IO, right, which is what we need in terms of working on the client side. We need to, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we need to include socket IO. And so this is where you might include all of those kind of files that other templates are going to need to use again and again and again, right? So if I go into index.jade, and we only have 2 templates here, you can see we extend layout. So it's basically gonna get everything that layout Jade has, but there's places that we can go and replace if we need to. And so you can start to see this format in terms of all these items that are being written out. And some of these classes